Recently I streamed the Anthem demo, and to be honest I only played it because a friend of mine wanted me to play it. And ever since I streamed it, I've been getting a lot of curious questions about whether Anthem is really worth it or not. And that's what I'm going to try to answer in this Anthem analysis. Anthem runs on the Frostbite engine, and as you would expect, anything on the Frostbite engine looks particularly good. Now I played this demo on PC, and there's definitely some problems when it comes to this game, despite looking as good as it does. Now, I know I have a little bit of a CPU bottleneck. I feel that that's kind of understating things. I'm running with a 980 Ti, but my CPU is an i7-3820, a 2011 CPU, so it's kind of old at this point. That said, this game does have some pretty high requirements. Unless you have the best parts, you're not going to be getting a stable 60 FPS. Thankfully, the game does feel pretty smooth and doesn't feel jittery at all if you're playing under 60 FPS. I was getting around 40 to 60, a little bit of fluctuation depending on where I was in the world, and it felt mostly fine, but a solid 60 would be preferable. It just is very hardware intensive. And this isn't any better on consoles. The games are locked to 30 FPS, and apparently the Xbox One X doesn't even reach that at times. I only point this out because I know a few people are going to come in saying, oh, this is why you should play on console, when it's actually worse on console. My biggest complaints tech-wise when it comes to Anthem is not just the frame rate though. If a game is hardware intensive because it looks this good, whatever, that's fine, I can deal with it. The problem is, there's a lot of other problems that really are inexcusable. For example, a lot of settings just kind of don't work. If you want to disable motion blur, turning off motion blur does literally nothing. I'm serious, you can disable motion blur in the options and motion blur is still there. Look at this, there is so much motion blur here. This has more motion blur than the Spyro remakes. It's nauseating. But there is actually a way to turn motion blur off, and no, you don't go into a config file and turn it off over there or something. What you do is you turn post-processing effects to medium or low. I'm not kidding you. This effectively means that if you don't want to play with motion blur on, you have to make some of the visuals look worse, even if you have a computer that can handle it perfectly fine. And I'm telling you, it's worth it turning this down because playing with that amount of motion blur is awful. This also means that if you play on console, you can't. There is no way to turn off motion blur. The option for motion blur is there on console, but you cannot turn down post-processing effects on console, so you're just stuck with it. Next up in my list of complaints is that the game likes to just kind of not load occasionally. I only had it happen to me twice, but a lot of my other friends were constantly having problems loading into matches because the game would load up to 95%, get stuck, and never load. You had to restart the game.
Are you guys loading in? I mean...
Okay, now I think I got my loading screen stuck.
Is it at 95%?
Something like that. Oh, well, there goes him. I'm gonna have to restart the game. And this is a well-known issue. Apparently the way to fix it is to turn the game to full screen mode instead of borderless window, but in my experience that didn't fix anything, it still did it. Needless to say, this game has some kinks to work out, and this is a demo. Apparently this is an old build, so maybe the new build works these out, but you know, the game's supposed to come out next month, and I don't have faith in those problems being fixed. The other complaints I have about the game involve the user interface. A lot of the menus don't make a lot of sense or don't work half the time. For example, do you want to invite your friend to your game? Well, your friends list just doesn't load a lot. I don't know why. You have to back out and then go back in, try to get it to work. It's really picky. Thankfully, people join without a problem, so the networking part seems to work as intended, at least if the servers aren't down, but actually trying to invite them is a pain. And then there's the fact that a lot of the stuff in-game is just sort of hidden in a weird spot in the UI. For example, how many of you knew you could change the colors of your Javelin past the initial metal choices you had? Yeah, you can do that. And the way you do that is by clicking this little sliver color over here on the side. Why would I think to click that? There's nothing there that says I can. And that's the general theme of this game, is that you'll probably look over a lot of things because you just don't see it. It's not obvious what you're supposed to be clicking on. But alright, you guys are probably here to know about the gameplay itself, so let's talk about the game. Well, again, I played this on PC, and the first thing I want to say is that the controls can be a little wonky at times. Trying to fly with a mouse doesn't feel that great, and there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that the mouse controls the direction you're turning instead of your movement keys, so you can't fly and look around at the same time. You can hover out of using your jetpack, but still, I would like to be able to use my movement keys. The second one is that the mouse feels like you're dragging it through sand. You'll continue to turn a direction after you've looked away. So I move my mouse to the left, and then hold it steady. I'll turn to the left, and then kind of keep turning, like it slows your body down, like there's momentum there. And that's really annoying to deal with and hard to get used to. Bad controls are something that's hard to convey without you picking up the game itself, but trust me when I say it's kind of awkward. You do get more used to the flying, but what you don't get used to is swimming. My lord, these are old like Resident Evil 2 tank controls. It is so hard to swim. All those problems I had with flying, that's the same problems you have with swimming, but worse. Thankfully, there doesn't seem to be any combat in the water, or at least there wasn't any in the demo. I hope that doesn't change for the full game. But trust me, just trying to swim through a little cave to get where you're supposed to be going is disorienting and difficult. Moving past that, the controls feel perfectly fine. It didn't feel like there was mouse acceleration, shooting itself felt fine, movement itself felt fine. It was just the jetpack and the swimming. And movement with the Javelin itself actually does feel pretty good, just again, not with swimming or jetpacking. Javelins are exosuits. They're effectively what give you your abilities, and they're basically the characters in the game, at least combat-wise. Every Javelin is different. They have different agility, they have different abilities, and overall this is actually pretty cool. You have the big, slow, generic tank unit, and you have the fast glass cannon sort of unit. But you also have Javelins in between, and every one of them have their own special abilities. 2 specials and an ultimate. The 2 regular specials actually recharge fairly quickly, so you're really going to get a lot of use of them. And everyone's ultimate seems fitting for how strong it should be. You'll start out with the Ranger Javelin, which is pretty straightforward. You have missiles and grenades. You basically just huck stuff at enemies and kill them. But the other Javelin I ended up trying was the Interceptor, which is the fast glass cannon sort of type. This Javelin has a triple jump, runs faster. In general, this is the one that's going to get in your face, do a bunch of damage very quickly, but also have very little shields and die very quickly. Again, this is the glass cannon. I was actually having a lot of fun with this character, just being so agile and being able to avoid everything around me while getting in for a melee attack, then shotgun, and then backing out, or maybe even using my ultimate just to melee everything to death. This one did feel different than the other Javelins, and that same sort of experience extends to all of the Javelins. They feel unique. The reason I chose this one was less so because I'm super interested in it, although I kind of was. It was more so because my friends were already using the other ones. And there is 4 available in the demo. I've already talked about the Ranger and Interceptor, but the other 2 are the Colossus, which is the big tank unit. I don't think I need to describe that one very well, and Storm. Storm's gimmick is that he can hover for a very long time and can use many different elements. So his ultimate may have to deal with fire or electricity, things like that. If my friends weren't already using this one, that's probably the route I would have taken. But this is interesting. It's like choosing a different character in a fighting game, except for you can swap out different moves. And it does tie directly into the loot system. Keep in mind this is a loot-based shooter. So all these specials and ultimates can be swapped for other specials and ultimates, and all of those are specific to your Javelin. Loot, thankfully, is shared between your squad. When you open a chest, generic loot pops out, and you can all pick it up. So you don't run into a situation where there's one really good gun that everyone wants and one person just steals it and then runs away. Once you pick up this generic loot in-game, you have to go back to the hub world, and then you can kind of tinker with all your stuff. This is one of the complaints I have. You have to change everything in the hub world. You can't just freely change this as you're out in free roam or in the middle of a mission, which means everything you've selected before you go into a dungeon, that's what you're just straight up running with. Or even if you're just, again, free roaming around the world, what you have is what you have until you go back to the hub world. I would like to be able to bring up a menu and change it at any time. And speaking of the hub world, I can't believe I forgot to talk about this when I was talking about graphics. The hub world runs so much worse than the rest of the game. This doesn't really mean a whole lot, because it's just the hub world, you're not fighting in it, you're just changing stuff, but your frame rate tanks in this area. I think it's all the extra lighting they have in here, but really it doesn't run well. So if you're trying to get your game to run fine, go into free roam and change settings, don't do it in the hub world. But back on topic to your loadout, you also have different guns you can choose, and this is where the game starts getting, well, kind of generic and not very interesting. You have all the usual guns you can choose from: sniper rifles, DMRs, assault rifles, LMGs, shotguns, machine pistols, heavy pistols, etc., but they all kind of feel the same. The recoil doesn't feel like recoil, it feels more like someone's pushing you rather than a sudden shot going off. And in general, the guns just don't feel very satisfying, which is a shame. It seems like most of the effort went into the Javelins, and then the guns are just there to be there. As a whole, I can say this about the entire combat loop. The Javelins as a concept are really interesting, but the combat itself is very repetitive and honestly kind of boring. The enemies didn't really give much of a challenge, and if they did, it was because they were a little bit more bullet spongy than the other enemies. AI didn't come across as smart, it came across as just mindless things for you to kill with your cool Javelins. And this is sort of a problem I have with almost every loot-based shooter. It's kind of the same problem I have with Warframe. The whole point of the game is to get more loot, rather than the combat being fun. And I know a lot of people really like Warframe, so don't lynch me for that. Warframe's a great game if you're into that, but that's never been my thing. This game definitely does have that appeal of, I just got a bunch of new stuff, I want to try the new stuff in the next mission, but if you just look at the core combat loop, the guns are not interesting, nor are the enemies. Some of the bosses were kind of fun, but that's pretty much it. Story-wise, I can't talk too much because this is just a demo. What we saw seemed like it was voice acted well and kind of maybe interesting, but I don't know who the characters are. I don't know why we're in this world. I don't know the backstory to it. I know nothing about the story, and it's not explained in the demo. For all I know, this will never be explained, or maybe it will be explained in great detail. This is something we'll have to wait until the full game comes out to really know. But as for the gameplay, I feel like we know how it's going to play out now. Anthem is definitely not a game I plan on buying, but it's also not a game that I absolutely hate and got infuriated with. It was just kind of one that existed. Another loot-based shooter. We've kind of played these before, but this one has a Javelin gimmick, and that's pretty much it. It's a game that if I got it for free, or maybe if it was super on sale, I would play it with some friends to waste time, but not something that I really want to, and it's definitely not something I'd play over other games, especially with how many good games are coming out next month. I mean, just Metro Exodus and Far Cry New Dawn are going to be keeping my attention for a long time. So what's my final verdict? Well, if you're really wanting to play Anthem, I would wait for reviews. I would wait to see how good the game actually is. Because of the problems that are in the demo, those will probably carry over to the final build of the game. I can definitely see this game having a very buggy launch, but let's hope that's not what it comes to. For everyone else that needs to be sold on this game, I can't sell it to you, and I don't plan on buying it myself either. But that about sums up this video on the Anthem demo. I'm going to try to make this video reach 10k views on the first day, 20k on the second day, and see where it goes from there. Those are sort of my new goals to reach. But I can't reach that goal without you guys' help, so let's see if we can get 500 likes on the first day, and if you can link this video around to as many people as possible, we'll see if we can reach that. Perhaps maybe even post this to the gaming subreddit. You know, do what you do. Anyway, as always, a huge thanks to my patrons and people over on Twitch that sub to me or just watch me over there. I love hanging out with you guys. If you want to follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Jarek4gamingdragon. That's where all the footage you're seeing in this video came from, so if you want to come hang out, go check it out. Hopefully, I'll see you over there, and if not, I'll see you in my next video.